And we'll be getting started here in just another moment or two. If you've just popped in, thank you for joining us. This is an event co-hosted by Riverwoods Exeter and Riverwoods Durham, two of the communities in the Riverwoods group. We are Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit continuing care retirement communities. And the topic we will be discussing this morning is unexpected change. I'm sure we are all really sick and tired of unexpected change.
Right.
For the last 4 months of unexpected change, with quite a few expected in the coming days. Let's see, who else do we have joining us this morning? Yes, Julie was with us last week. Thank you for being here again, Julie. We're glad that you enjoyed the program enough to dial back in again. And all right, how are we looking on time? It looks like we have most of our participants online, and we'll go ahead and get started. So again, thank you for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. We are here with Dr. Everett Moitoza. But first, let me run through a couple of housekeeping items. The presentation this morning is co-hosted by Riverwoods Exeter and Riverwoods Durham, continuing care retirement communities. Due to the number of participants, everyone remains muted for the duration of the program. However, we would love to hear from you. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At the end of his presentation, Dr. Moitoza will be answering questions, as many as we can get to at the end of the program. We will try to keep this to 45 minutes. We know your time is valuable. If you need to contact us or you would like more information about the Riverwoods group communities, there will be contact information up on slides at the end of the presentation, or feel free to visit us online at riverwoodsexeter.org or riverwoodsdurham.org. We also have very active Facebook pages, and we'd love to see you on social media. So without further ado, let me introduce our presenter this morning. Dr. Moitoza is a business psychologist who has consulted for hundreds of businesses across all industries. His focus has been on interpersonal and organizational conflict and change management issues, especially those related to family businesses and partnerships. His opinions and solutions regarding business and performance issues are frequently sought after and published by the business and local media. Everett has a doctorate in psychology from Boston University, an MBA from Southern New Hampshire University, a master's in behavioral sciences from Bridgewater University, but that's not all. He also has a bachelor's in music from the Berklee College of Music. Everett has taught graduate level courses in Harvard, Boston, Northeastern, and Lesley universities, and at present he is conducting research on the experience and management of change in family businesses and partnerships. And now I'll turn it over to you, Everett, for this great presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing the many strategies that you will be providing us on dealing with unexpected change.
Great. Thank you, Adele. And good morning and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk with you, particularly at this time, about unexpected change. What it is, how does it affect us, and what are some of the strategies that we can utilize to manage it and to actually succeed with it. And as we would think about, change is a process, it's not an event. And particularly with unexpected change, it is not something that simply occurs and then it's over with. And change has both a positive and negative part to it. That can be very positive change, like some might think of as a wedding as a positive event, or a bris, or a baptism. And so those types of changes. Or it can be a negative change, and we'll probably be more focusing on some of the negative, challenging changes that we all are facing, particularly at this time. The other part of them is that changes can be short-term or they can be long-term. And today, again, I think we'll be focusing more on long-term changes. I just want to put up a slide quickly that shows you a little bit about sort of the change process, how individuals, how we react to change. First, we go to denial, little shock and confusion, then some anger, down at the bottom there, the sad little ball there, letting go, fear, frustration, uncertainty, and then thinking about it some, coming perhaps with a strategy and then a commitment to go on to what's next. And that follows the change that came really from the grief theories of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and those that occur also in management in business end of things. So, we'll go the other way. So we're going to talk about expected change versus unexpected change. And so here's an example of expected change. Here's this young mom who looks pretty happy. So it sounds like it was pretty expected. There she is eating what is either a snack or a very healthy lunch. And here she is possibly or probably have some level of apprehension about how this pregnancy is going to turn out and how things are going to work for this newborn child. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Does she know? Does she not know? See, that's another example of how change can be. If you do an amniocentesis and you decide, I want to know the birth, okay, then it's expected. And if you don't, then, okay, surprise me. Let's see what happens is another way to look at it. So I get this wheel going right. There we go. So here's unexpected change. Not so nice. This unexpected change is sudden. It's potentially disorganizing and disorienting and can generate a significant sense of stress and fear and loss of control. So the unexpected changes are much more powerful. As I said, the onset is usually sudden. So let's look at this quadrant set of all these kinds of changes put together. On the upper left-hand side, you see some expected change, a happy 1 or 2 week vacation, short term. A meniscus repair of your knee would also be an expected, relatively short-term one. A long-term expected change would be a marriage, perhaps, a pregnancy, most usually, and or moving to a CCRC like Riverwoods. Usually it's an expected change that takes some time and some thought and some careful consideration. On the other side, we see the unexpected change, and it comes in two different flavors, both short-term and long-term. An auto accident would be an example of a short-term change, unexpected. Any kind of accident or event, being robbed would be perhaps an example of that, or a 4-week visit from your child previous to this beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. The ones that I'd like us to focus on today, however, is the lower right-hand quadrant of long-term unexpected change. COVID-19 qualifies for that. A DWI, being arrested for driving while under the influence. That process lasts months, if not years, sometimes, and at great expense. A home loss, be it by a fire or a tornado or a house that's repossessed by the bank. And lastly, and one of the most difficult, would be a negative or a terminal medical diagnosis. These are all long-term changes that really generate what I call, and Brene Brown, who's a professor at University of Texas in Houston, would call a marathon stressor or a marathon change. That is, these are changes that stay for a long time. Our COVID-19, I think we're seeing, is around for a pretty long time, and we really can't see the end of that yet. We don't have a vaccine. Our testing really isn't significant or sufficient enough to provide us with herd immunity. And so we're in for a long-term process. And that kind of change, that kind of unexpected change, which really holds us to be pretty vulnerable, is debilitating. And can be very, very exhausting. The response to change in any situation, but particularly in the long-term one, is to resist the unknown and to believe that if I do nothing, status quo, I'll be safe. The status quo will protect me. I don't have to change. When in doubt, wait it out, which sometimes can be effective, but most usually isn't. And it's driven by really that basic enemy of ours, fear. The emotional brain is that part of our brain that is called the limbic system. It sits in the middle, as you can see here in our brain in this slide, and it's the fight-flight center of our behavior in our brain. The fight part is the anger part, and the fight part is the anger, and the flight part is the fear part of our emotions. This is the fear of change center, and it's operating in all of us to a greater or lesser extent. We'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. As I said, the limbic system is the emotional brain. It generates that fight, anger, flight, fear, or the third option that we have, and that's the one we're going to try to really connect with today, is the coping one, which is neither the fight nor the flight, and we find a way to manage and moderate and mediate this limbic system. For in some of us, this system is very, very active. Arthur Brooks, who is a writer, consultant, works in a think tank in Cambridge, wrote an article recently for the Atlantic, and he developed an equation for being change hardy, or we could also use another synonym, which is resilient or resilience. And the equation that he came for that was that change hardy equals your genetics plus the circumstances of the strength and nature of the change that you're facing, and then the habits or the coping mechanisms that you have within yourself. Now, the interesting part about this, as I said a couple of seconds ago, is that about between 44 and 52% of all of that genetic piece is already hardwired and is present at birth. And so it's not changeable. We are genetically wired with a higher or lower threshold to respond in that fight or flight way, where some individuals are more sensitive than others. And that's what can affect certainly our level of change hardiness. The circumstances are about somewhere between 10 and 40%. So if you're 40% would be a very high level of stress and change, like a COVID-19, like a car accident or something of that nature. So that part of our ability to be change hardy is going to be affected by the strength or the seriousness of the change that we're facing. And then the last, and this is the part that we really have control over, are the habits or the actions that we take. And that's what's going to determine how change hardy we are. So not to be pessimistic about things, but our genetics are there, and we have to understand them, in some ways appreciate them, but also to manage to know that if we have a high genetic loading for our limbic system to be overly reactive, we're going to need some pretty strong practice and habits to develop ourselves around changes that occur. And if the changes or the circumstances, as it says here, are pretty small, then we're probably going to do pretty good. And if they're pretty high, then they're going to be more challenging. So habits, actions. Good habits, as the slide says, are as addictive as bad habits, but much, much more rewarding. So I want to talk to you now about what are some of these change hardy traits. So individuals who are change hardy, these are some of the things that they have. This comes from some research by Scott and Moran, just recently, 2020. Excuse me. People who are change hardy have high emotional intelligence. What does that mean, emotional intelligence, Everett? Well, it means that they know what's going on inside themselves emotionally. They know what's going on in the person they're interacting with emotionally. They can read them as accurately as to how they're feeling. And they also have the ability to understand the interaction and the quality, the emotional quality of what's happening in that interaction. High EQ. If you look at leadership profiles in business or in politics and so forth, individuals who are very successful, not all, but many, if not most, they have a very high level of EQ. The second is that they're action-oriented. These are not individuals who are passive, independent. People who are change hardy are, pardon the term, proactive. They operate on their world, on their life to make things different. They also have a sense and a perspective of that they are in control of their lives. They know what's going on inside of them, and they know what to do with that, and they act upon it in a positive way. These are, as you can see, these are half full people. These are folks who, when they see things, they look at the positive interpretation, they look at the positive activity for fulfillment, not for threat. They also seek and develop their friends and family. The example would be being in contact with Zoom or socially distancing, time together with friends, family. One of the things I'm hearing now more and more is how people are contacting old friends and sort of distant members of their family, just connecting to see how they are. There is a pull to do that, to be more in touch, so that the sense of our social fabric and our familial fabric is more called for right now. And we receive a change hardy dividend from it. The other trait that they have is that they have a sense of humor. And I think we all can relate to folks who have a sense of humor do tend to be able to roll with the punches more. They can see the irony in situations, and they can see the humor of them. Excuse me. These are also people who see obstacles as challenges and not beleaguered by them. They don't see themselves as victims, but they see themselves in situations that are difficult or that have change demands to them as challenges, not as persecutions. So, given all of that, let's look at, we said these were going to be 5 things you can do. We actually have, I think, about 9 now that I've put together. Here are some of the things we can actually do in the face of these marathon changes and these marathon stressors. Schedule time to worry. Here's what I do. 7 o'clock to 7:15 every evening is the time that I set aside to have any worries that may come to me during the day, that I take them up with myself at 7 o'clock. Sometimes I'll stretch it out to 7:20, but usually it's about 15 minutes. I also, when I have them during the day, I write them down so that I don't forget them. Because ironically, what often happens is I might forget them because they dissipate. And then if I write them down and I go back at 7 o'clock, I say, like, well, what was I worried about that for? It really didn't seem like that big of a deal. So we schedule time to worry. The other is we deliberately create a new routine. If change is happening to us and around us, we take control of that change by developing new routines, new strategies, simply new ways of being. We might wake up earlier. We might have tea instead of coffee. We might walk 5 miles instead of 2. We might take a different road to a destination and so forth. Small, little activities, but they are done deliberately and thoughtfully. Begin to identify your emotions is another one. To make internal external. So simply to say to yourself, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I'm feeling sad this morning. Wonder what that's about. And plumb that a little bit around a sense of what my feeling, what are the feelings that I'm having, what is that about, and perhaps make it more conscious. That's a process that actually, ironically, diffuses the emotions and can reduce them. Embrace uncertainty. This is the magical mystery tour Step Right This Way suggestion, which is you look at what is unknown, what is uncertain, and to move into it in a way that, in fact, there can be a sense that there's some good here. I need to find it. Perhaps there's some positive piece. The other is to believe things happen for a reason. That the universe has some kind of plan, and that, certainly it's hard sometimes to put this together when you look at all the over 120,000 deaths on this COVID-19 pandemic, the issues with problems with unemployment, the racial issues that are occurring right now. These are all changes and stressors that can be very, very frightening. But that we again start thinking of, okay, where is this leading and what is the utility of these? To reverse argue the opposite, which is to say, rather than to say, this is ruining my life is ruined by this event, whatever it might be. Rather saying the other side, which is, how is this going to enhance my life? There's got to be, I'm looking at this animal stall in the barn, and rather than saying, what am I going to do with all this manure? I say, there's got to be a pony here someplace. I need to find it. So we reverse argue the opposite. Another is, as per the traits that we talked about, to intensify our social and familial support networks. We are a society that has, in many respects, diffused our contacts with family, particularly, and friends, partly because of the tremendous mobility that exists in America with cars and so forth. Now that we're driving less and perhaps biking more, walking more, we have a greater opportunity to have contact with our networks. And then to list the good that you want to come out of all of this change. And one of the ways that you can do this, and I certainly do, is to have a daily journal and write down some of the things that you see and that you've experienced or that you've thought about that is really pretty good today and that you can see might be good tomorrow, that might be leading to some more full, more pleasant, and more happy of a life. Excuse me. And the last is to think about a meditation, a quiet time, or some mindfulness time. It doesn't have to be formalized, but we take some time when we turn the frequency rate within our brains, within our life down, and we simply sit quietly somewhere, contemplating whatever it is that we might, want to be thinking about. So, unexpected and unintended change. These are the acts, habits that are all designed to help develop new skills and perhaps generate different, more positive emotions. So when we're confronted with these changes, we'll know how to respond and to feel more in control of them. We spent some time thinking about that today, and I hope that we could find and help you find a more positive path for living with and feeling more in control of those events that are unintended, unexpected, that are long-term, particularly in our life. And so thank you for that, taking the time to be with us. I think we're going to have an opportunity for some questions now.
Thank you so much, Everett. That was great. And while we're going to get some questions opportunity, if you'd like to ask him a question, he will be answering those live. Oh, we've got one right here. Everett, what are the 3 biggest life changes that require resilience?
Wow. Again, this would be my subjective answer to that. I think by far and away, the biggest is the death of a child. Mm. The second would be the death of a spouse or oneself. And the last would be the loss of your home. Mm. Yeah. And when in the second one, the death of a spouse or self, it would also include close family members. So death, I think, are the most difficult, and particularly if they're unexpected, because there's no preparation for them. They're always difficult, but particularly if they're unexpected. And of those 2 death ones, the third being the loss of your home, your place. And loss of home can mean an apartment, it can mean a house, it can mean, for many people, it also can mean, particularly this time of year, of a summer camp or retreat or a second home. That become major legacy issues. I see a lot in my work with family businesses when there's often a family compound in the family business that wants to get moved from one generation to the other. The difficulties of the issues that come up, the conflicts that come up within the family around who's going to get it, who gets the first 2 weeks of July, and who puts the geraniums out in the flower window boxes. So that's another level. But loss of your primary home would be in that same category. Yeah.
This kind of goes along.
Great question.
Yeah, this goes along with that. In the same vein, is there any type of counseling or therapy that would best treat anticipatory symptoms of change or perhaps lingering symptoms of change?
Sure. There are 2 that come to mind. If these are abrupt changes, if they are unexpected and short-term changes that are assaults, car accidents where there's bodily harm or threat, plane crashes, if you will, assault. I said assaults, rapes. Being held up at gunpoint, being robbery. One that is particularly, and actually one of the only ones that's effective for those kind would be a therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a very particular kind of therapy that actually pinpoints working on the limbic system, the amygdala in the brain, as we showed you a picture of the limbic system earlier on. It actually is very targeted towards that part of the brain, and it shows tremendous positive effect for any individual who's experienced trauma. The second kind, for less violent or things of that nature, would be a therapy called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a relatively short-term therapy that puts a lot of the, as you might think, cognitive behavioral therapy. It moves a lot of the emotional experiences that are unsettling and feeling uncontrollable into cognitive and behavioral terms and insights and strategies that one can use to respond to it. Some of the pieces that I presented today in that last slide on things you can do were from the armamentarium of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Great. I have another question that goes back to what you were talking about, is dealing with a major change. Would transitioning from your long-term home to a retirement community such as Riverwoods, would that be considered a loss of home or a different type of change?
That's a great question. Well, it's a change. It's probably going to be expected. I'm going to presume this is an expected one. That is, that someone in the family or the couple hasn't been mandated that they must do this. So it's an expected change. It's a long-term change, because the consequences, hopefully, are long-term. We want them to make the transition and then to live long and happily, as most people do who are Riverwoods residents, at least 98% of the ones I've met. And I don't think I've met those other 2%. But the ability to make that long-term change and to be able to have an expected normal anticipatory anxiety from it, because there is going to be some deliberateness to it. There's some period of time that it takes, and there's a lot of opportunity to really question it, to be able to process all of the things that it will mean. And a lot of the things that it will mean is a level of loss, a loss of what was, without having a clear appreciation and perhaps perspective of what will be. And that's what makes, in many respects, to go specifically, we are talking and sponsored by Riverwoods here, but that's what makes that transition, I think, so especially difficult. I know what was and is, and I'm going to what I don't know what will be. Now, the pictures look very good on the website, but I don't really know what that's going to be like, and what happens to my bird feeders, and all those kinds of things. Will I be able to do those things? So a lot goes into that in a specific way, from having your own home or apartment or condo, whatever, and moving into a CCRC. Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's another question. Can you talk a little bit more about scheduling time to worry and how that is beneficial?
Yes, great question. And I do this. This is real. It's very beneficial for anticipatory anxiety. When you're expecting a change and you start ruminating, thinking over and over again about all these particular things and all day long, and these worries and these thoughts come intrusive. You're doing your work and all of a sudden you think about, how am I ever going to get that desk from our house into this new place, or whatever the worry thing might be. And how it's helpful is that you write it down, and so you don't have to worry about forgetting it. Because most of the reason why people ruminate or continue to worry about a same or similar issue through the day is because they're really worried that they're going to forget about what they're worrying about.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny in many respects. So if you write it down, you say, okay, I got it there. I know I can. And at 7:00, I know I can open up this little loose leaf binder that I have, and I can see, okay, I got the desk issue. And so then at 7:00, oftentimes, unconsciously, the individual is actually has kind of figured out what they're going to do with that desk. It's amazing. Maybe 60% of the time, the issue will have somehow, almost unconsciously, solved itself. And if it hasn't, then they've at least stopped intrusive worrying during the day, and they've circumscribed it to a 15 or 20-minute period at night. And then, let's just say, they still have the worry at the end of their 15 minutes. Say, okay, let's keep this on the schedule, and I'm going to continue this tomorrow night at 7 o'clock as well. And maybe I'm going to include talking to somebody else about it at that time or during the day. But I'm going to keep it on the books. It's not solved yet. But I have a place for it, and it's not circling around in my mind all day long.
Wow, that makes sense. Great question. How can I help my husband, who is a bit of a stick in the mud, embrace uncertainty?
Uh-huh. So, stick in the mud. I'm not sure of the clinical definition of stick in the mud. I'll take a stab at it, though. This sounds like somebody who is recalcitrant or resistant to change in some ways. So we're going to call that the stick in the mud. So what I say to those folks is, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Is that what you want? Always they say, no, that's not what I want at all. It's like, okay, what would you like? The problem with a stick in the mud is trying to pull it out of the mud. The key piece is to let the stick stay in the mud and observe it and wait, in some respects, for the tide to come in. And to help, and that tide is by, again, simply saying, so do you want what is? And some folks would say, I really do want what is. I don't want this change. I don't want us to be doing this new thing. I'm not change hardy. Alice, I'm not change hardy. You know me. You've known me for all these years. I'm a regular guy. I'm a, breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. That's who I am. I'm a pretty regimented person. And you're asking me to move out of my comfort zone. And the answer is, that's correct. We are. Because time, for some crazy reason, is still moving. And it's moving inexorably towards our death. Because that's pretty well assured. How do we want to be in that time frame? Because things will change whether we want to or not. Frank, do you want to be in charge of this, or do you not want to be in charge of this? Do you want to just sort of let whatever happens, or do you want to be in charge of it? Because you strike me, Frank, as a guy who really does have clear ideas about how you'd like things to be. So tell me how you'd like this to be, given the fact that life is doing this, time is doing this, that the only thing that's constant is change. How are you going to control that change? So sticks in the mud are passive resistant folks because they're not sure what the strategies are for how they can be active and generative. And so if you get them talking about that, oftentimes they have lots of ideas how to be active and generative. But if you try to pull that stick out, that doesn't work. It's like the Chinese finger puzzle. If you try to pull it out, it holds you up. And so the only way out of the Chinese finger puzzle actually is you go this way. It's paradoxical. You have to move your fingers in, you turn them, and then it comes out.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we've got time for one more question. Let's see what we have here. Here we go. What type of change is the most difficult to manage? The short-term expected, the long-term unexpected, short-term unexpected? Can you talk a little bit about those different types of changes and what's the most challenging to manage?
Sure, that's the one with the quadrants that we had, the short-term, long-term thing. Yeah. Well, and as per the topic for this presentation, the unexpected is always the most difficult. The unexpected short term are usually trauma situations. They're accidents or events that occur. They're abrupt, they're short term, and they're very intense. So they have their own particular kind of change challenge to them. The good news of them is that they are relatively short term, and so you can respond with certain kinds of treatments to them if that's the case, if it's an actual physical assault and so forth. The ones that we're living in now with COVID-19 is the unexpected long term. And these, again, are marathons, which are debilitating and they're exhausting, and there's so much uncertainty, and the stakes are so high in terms of death. And if not death, certain levels of illness. I've had some conversations with individuals who in their 40s and 50s had COVID and who had very nearly died, and how because they were so sick in hospital, and how debilitating, and how several of them actually wished that they had died because they were so sick. And that's not uncommon with people who are that sick. They're looking for some change. I mean, that's the highest level of extreme change you could imagine. So the unexpected long-term marathon change, I think, as a type, is the most difficult, and draws on the most challenging for all of us to manage.
It definitely makes sense. Well, thank you everyone so much for being with us this morning. We did get a question asking if this seminar would be offered again. And yes, it will be offered again today at 1 p.m. There is still time to register. You can do that through our website, riverwoodsexeter.org or riverwoodsdurham.org, and click the link marked webinars. However, there also will be a recording available of this webinar on our website. It's available. It takes about 2 days for us to get that video posted, but you can always check back and watch this entire presentation on video. If you've got somebody that you think would benefit from this information, we'd love for you to share that with your loved ones and your friends. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Moitoza, for your insights and your wisdom. And we hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Goodbye.